Hello everybody. Let's do some solutions to problem 3. If you are interested in solutions to problems 1 or 2, I believe that we have a good discussion of that in last year's solution video. So let's proceed. Part A is weave strings, where you get two strings, A and B, and it's supposed to display them in this order: second string, first string, second string, first string. So let's create the method. I don't see any reason not to call them A and B in this case. So the simplest solution would just be to say second string, second string, first string, like that. I don't see any reason to do anything more complicated. So you should always test as you go. So let's run and make sure it works. And there we see BA, BA. Great. So I don't want to keep seeing the output from that first method, so I'm going to comment it out. The second method for problem B is same last letter. So blink and sync should return true. And then same last letter, lobster and sync should return false. And then same last letter, empty string and hello should return false because the empty string is empty. Okay, so let's create the method. Oops. Okay, well, I've screwed it up already. So blink and sync are terrible names. So we could call these A and B, but I think I'm going to call this first and second, since that seems like a better set of names to me. So let me do first what I saw a lot of people doing, and then we'll fix it because it has an important problem in it. So what I saw a lot of people doing was this. So last letter 1. And so they'll have like the first word, and then they'll access the last letter using substring. But now we have to know what index, what location is the last letter. So you can get that by saying first dot length -1. If you didn't watch the video, there's a version of substring where you don't have to give it the ending index, which would be this. Oops. Nope. So that would be the ending index. It's one larger than the starting index if we're just trying to get out one character. But there's a version of substring where you just tell it the starting index and it goes all the way to the end of the string. And if your starting index is the last character, then going to the end of the string is just going to give you one character, the last character, which is exactly what we want. So now we'll have last letter 2, and here we'll have seconds.substring, and then seconds.length -1. Okay, so now we have the two letters, and we can say return if last letter 1, dot equals last letter 2. Because remember, this is going to return true or false. Oh, this is supposed to return Boolean. Boolean. So this is supposed to, this will evaluate to be true or false. And so we can just return whatever that evaluates to be. The longer version of this would be saying if last letter dot equals first, last letter 2, then we'd return true. Otherwise, we'd return false. But that's 5 lines of code when this does the exact same thing. You just return what that evaluates to be. Okay. So the problem with this, well, let's run it and we'll see what the problem is. All right, let's run and see what the problem is. So you see string index out of bounds exception. So that means we're trying to access an index in a string that doesn't exist. And then the place we're trying to access is -1. And the reason why that's happening is because the last test case, we have an empty string whose length is 0. So then if we try and access a substring starting from first.length is 0, and then you subtract 1 would be -1. So we're trying to access a substring starting at -1, and that index doesn't exist. So the problem is you need to put in a check to make sure that both of these strings have length larger than 0. I saw a lot of people doing that check only after they tried to access the last letter of the string. So probably a better place to do that would be up here. You could say if first.length is less than or equal to 0, well, I guess it wouldn't be less than 0, or seconds.length equals 0, then we'd return false. Otherwise, we're going to keep going. We get out the two last letters, and we return if they're equal. So this is a very kind of concise solution to the problem. Let's run it and make sure it works. Aha, now we run into another thing that I saw a couple of people doing. So you might notice that it doesn't display anything at all here. And the reason why is because it's returning a Boolean, but we don't have anything displaying anywhere. So a good solution to this problem would be, let's just display the outputs like this. And we'll run it again. And you can see true, false, false, which is exactly what it should be because the first case has the same last letter, and then the second test case doesn't, and the third doesn't. All right, so let's comment these ones out. You can comment multiple lines by selecting them and then doing Control-Shift/. So part D is called insert, and this one is another one that displays, oh no, sorry, part C is display double, or double display. So you're supposed to loop through each letter and display it twice. So let's not call it hey, let's call it message. So this is the usual kind of pattern for looping over things. In Java, there's several different data structures that you can loop over the parts of. So for an array, you might loop over the elements of the array. For an array list, you would loop over the elements of the array list. And the string, like I said, acts in the notes, I said acts very much like an array because you can loop, because each character has its own index, and so you can loop over the indices. So the general pattern here is you have a for loop where you loop over each location in the thing you're trying to loop over, and you call the location numbers I. And then you have a statement where you get whatever value is at location I, and you save it into a variable. So what's different, though, is that the way that you actually ask the variable what its size is different depending on what kind of data structure you have. And the way that you ask it to give you the value at location I is different. So in an array, you say .length to figure out how many things you're looping over. For an array list, you say .size to get how many things you're looping over. And for a string, you say .length, but with parentheses because it's a method, to get how many things you're looping over. Then the way that you get the value out of the list, for an array, you use the square bracket notation to get the value at location I. For an array list, you use the get method, and you say location I. And for a string, I'm telling you to use substring, starting at location I, ending at location I plus 1. So you just get one character at a time. Several people mentioned that it's syntactically cleaner to use char at, and I totally agree. But I'm asking you not to use char at because the AP test doesn't let you use the char data type at all. And I want you to be sure that you know how to use substring to do the same thing, because that's what you'll have to do on the AP test, even though it's syntactically a little bit grosser. So in your own programming, do the right thing for the AP test, and for practice for the AP test in this class, please only use substring. So with all of that said, let's implement that pattern. So I'm going to loop over all the locations in message. So I'm going to go to message.length, and then I'm going to get out a string for each letter. So I'll say message.substring going from I to I plus 1. So now the letter variable is going to be equal to each letter in message one at a time. And rather than print line, I'm just going to print because I want them all to be on the same line. And I'll have 2 copies of each letter, letter plus letter. Okay, let's go ahead and run it. And you can see HHEEYY, so that appears to have worked. All right, let's comment that one out. Let's do part D. Part D is called insert, where we're trying to insert a character between each of the characters in another string. So let's say insert hello there, and then I'm going to insert a star character between each of the characters in hello there. Cool, void. I'm going to call this one message, and I'm going to call this one really the right thing to call this is probably the word delimiter, but you might not know what that word means. A delimiter is something that separates other things in a list. So if you have a bunch of things separated by commas, that would be, the delimiter would be a comma. So I'm just going to call it delimiter, but you could call it whatever you want. That's fine. All right, so what are we trying to do? All right, so we want the same pattern here, where we're going to loop over all of the locations in message. And I think we want to get out every single letter. So I'll have string letter equals message.substring going from I to I+1. And we still want to print out each one. Only after we print the letter, then we want to print the delimiter. So this is almost going to work. Let's run it and see what's going to go wrong. So if you look at the console output down here, you see I've inserted a star between all the characters, but I have an extra star at the end because my for loop loops through all of the characters. And after I display each one, then I display a star. So you could do something awkward, like put an if statement here. So if I equals, oops, this is the wrong method. You could do something like say, only if I doesn't equal the last one. So if I doesn't equal message.length -1. So that would stop us from displaying the delimiter in the last loop. But then I need an else statement because in the last loop I still want to display the letter itself. So this would work here. I'm saying as long as it's not the last letter, as long as it's not the last letter, display the letter plus the delimiter. And then when it is the last letter, just display the letter. This is less clean than if we simply stop before the end. So what's going to be better here, what's going to be a little bit better here is let's stop the loop at the last character. So we're going to display everything except the last character. And then at the end, let's display message.substring message.length -1. So that's going to display the last character by itself. So let's run it again. Great. And so now you can see we've inserted the delimiter between each of the characters, but we don't have the extra one at the end. Let's do count letter. So count letter is supposed to let us count how many times each letter occurs. So number of A's would be equal to count letter A in hay is for horses, which indeed it is. All right, so I'm going to call this one letter, and I'm going to call this one str for string. So same kind of pattern. I'm going to have a counter, which is how many times we've seen the letter. I'm going to loop over all the letters in string. So same pattern. I'm going from 0 to the length of string. And I'm going to get, yep. Okay, 3-year-old interruption. What were we doing? Great. So I'm going to get a substring from I to I+1. So I'm going to get each letter out of the string. And now I want to increase the count only if the string letter equals the letter I'm looking for. In that case, we'll say count ++. And then at the end, we'll return count. Okay, I want to change some of my names here. I don't like letter anymore. Now I want to call this target. Because like a target is something that you search for. String is fine, but now I can rename this to be just letter. So I think that is going to read slightly better. Oh yeah, let's run it. So how many times does A occur? It looks like once in that example. And, oh, I'm not displaying it. Here we are. Great, once. But then if I add 3 more A's in the middle there, now it's 4. Great. All right, the last method is called weave2. where we are interspersing individual letters. So A, and then B. So I'm going to call this first and second again. And what does it say? If the strings aren't the same length, display nothing. So here's what I want to do. I want to say if first.length doesn't equal second.length, then I can return. You might not have known that you can have a return statement in a void method, but you can. What happens when you hit a return is it just exits the method immediately. So usually what I like to do is I like to test for failure conditions right at the very top and exit immediately. And if none of the failure conditions happen, then you can continue having your code here without having to have it indented inside a block statement from an if. So great. So if they're not the same length, we exit. Therefore, we can now assume they are the same length. So now we can loop over all the locations. Oops. First dot length. And we're sure that we could use first or second because now we're sure that those are the same length because we tested for that up here. So now let's have letter 1 equals first.substring from I to I plus 1. And let's have letter 2 be second.substring from I to I plus 1. So it's the same pattern where we're getting the character at location I, but we're getting that character out of the first string, whoops, and also out of the second string. And so now we can have a print statement where we'll print, are we supposed to be printing the first and then the second? Yes. So we'll print letter 1 and then letter 2. I believe that should work. Cool, looks like it worked. Okay, I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me. Good luck, everybody.